Hello, students. Today we're continuing in speaking about the story of Plato that had to do with the story of Plato and Atlantis. And I had added a few pictures of Socrates, Plato, and Epicurus, which that way has more than like a timeline of years, so you know exactly who were the contemporaries of Socrates and Critias that are told in the story. And we probably know Plato and Socrates the most. And so I wanted to continue talking to you about the story of Atlantis. And the other day we stopped when Socrates and Critias are having a conversation about Solon and how the grandfather of Critias and Solon's friend got the story from Atlantis. So we continue when Solon was the one that have heard this veritable tradition, and he replies with the beginning of the story, which goes something like this. At the head of the Egyptian delta, where the river Nile divides, there is a certain district which is called the district of Sais, and the great city of the district is also called Sais, and the city from which Amasis the king was sprung. The citizens have a deity who is their foundress. She is called in the Egyptian tongue Neith, which is asserted by them to the same whom the Hellenes call Athena. Now the citizens of this city are great lovers of the Athenians and say that they are in some way related to them. Thither came Solon, who was received by them with great honor, and he asked the priests, who were the most skillful in such matters, about antiquity, and made the discovery that neither he nor any other Hellene, and by Hellene they mean people that had been born in Athenia, Greek and Athenia, knew anything worth mentioning about the times of the old. So basically, they're telling him, Solon asked the priests of Egypt, and the priests of Egypt or Sais tell him that nobody knows anything, nobody else but us knows or has this story in memory recorded. On one occasion, when he was drawing them on to speak the antiquity, he began to tell about the most ancient things in our part of the world, about Phoroneos, who is called the first, and about Niobe, and after the deluge, to tell of the lives of Deucalion and Pyrrha. And he traced the genealogy of their descendants and attempted to reckon how many years old were the events of which he was speaking and to give dates. So Solon is trying to figure it out how old, just by asking questions to the priests, because the priests are not really wanting to give the information kind of freely. So he's just asking them questions to find out how old all of these, what they're talking about Atlantis happened. So he can establish sort of like a timeline for him. One of the priests, who was the very great age, said, O Solon, you Hellenes are but children, and there is never an old man who is a Hellene. That means that, none of the old men that were from Atlantis kind of survived, and nobody is from that part. Most of the people have died. So Solon hearing this says, what do you mean? I mean to say, he replied, that in mind you are all young. There is no old opinion handed down among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. And I will tell you the reason of this. There has been, and there will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. There is a story which even you have preserved, that once upon a time the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, now what he's doing is describing all this with an allegory, using kind of religion or myth to explain in kind of an analogy of what happened. Um, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burned up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by thunderbolt. Now this has the form of a myth, he says, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving around the earth and in the heavens, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth recurring at long intervals of time. So we know, and this is something we're going to talk about later when we talk about planetary, planets, what was the orbits of the planets at that time, or, kind of the evolution, geological things that happen. So he's describing that this is not a myth, that there is, the declination of the bodies. By bodies, he means they used to call wonders of bodies to the planets in itself. And they say they're moving around the earth and so we know he's talking about the planets. We know that he's talking about time on the earth, that there was some kind of movement of the earth that might be either geological. There were probably a lot of sinking, volcanoes, things like that. When this happens, those who live upon the mountains and in dry and lofty places are more liable to destruction than those who dwell by rivers or in the seashore. And from this calamity, the Nile, who is our never-failing Savior, saves and delivers us. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, among you herdsmen and shepherds of the mountains are the survivors, whereas those of you who live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. But in this country is talking about Atlantis, neither at that time nor at any other does the water come from above all the fields, having always a tendency to come up from below, for which is the reason the things preserved here are said to be the oldest. So pretty much he's talking about some kind of movement of the continents, what we understand now maybe as some kind of plate subversion. We're going to talk about geology later on, but the fact is that whenever the extremity of winter frost or of summer sun does not prevent, the human race is always increasing at times and at other times diminishing in numbers. And whatever happened either in your country or in ours, or in any other region of which we are informed, if any action which is noble or great, or in any other way remarkable has taken place, all that has been written down of old and is preserved in our temples. And this is important. What I'm going to say now says, whereas you and other nations are just being provided with letters and the other things which states require, and then at the usual period the stream from heaven descends like a pestilence, and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education, and thus you have to begin all over again as children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. And this is important to mention. When and I used to teach archaeastronomy, which is I'm teaching astronomy, which is the science of astronomy, but we study the archaeological formation of things. And so one of the things that happens, and it will happen the same right now, in our information age, it probably will be in a way worse, because we don't have anything written in stone. Everything is written in paper, is written digitally now. So what happens is if there's a global destruction, like it happened in Atlantis, for example, then he's talking about those records didn't survive because, paper and letters, that's what he's talking about, letters. By letters, he means papers, manuscripts, the writing of the ages of that civilization. Anything that wasn't written on caves or was not written on stone per se might not survive a destruction like this. So that's what he's saying. Then you don't remember your history from before. You have to begin like children again from the beginning with nothing, like a, tabula rasa kind of type. And for those genealogies of yours which you have recounted to us, Solon, they are no better than the tales of children. For in the first place, you remember only one deluge, whereas there are many of them. And in the next place, you do not know that there dwelt in your land the fairest. This is when he's talking about Atlantis. In your land dwelt the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, of whom you and your whole city are but a seed of a remnant. And this was unknown to you because for many generations the survivors of that destruction died and made no sign. For there was a time, Solon, before the great deluge of all, when the city which now is Athens was first in war and was preeminent from the excellence of her laws. And so it starts telling to Solon, the priest tells Solon things that were happening on Athens at that time, and that they have a patron, which is, in this case, it will be Athena. And she says, she founded your city 1,000 years before ours, receiving from the earth and Hephaestus, the seed of your race. And then she founded ours, the constitution which is sent down in our sacred registers as 8,000 years old. And we see when we look at history, you know, that's why in some cases you might see when they're trying to figure it out, the ages of the pyramids, for example, in which everybody wants to say 5 to 6,000, but really we know the pyramids are older than that. But because of now that we have techniques such as satellite imagery and other things that we can use on the pyramids to be able to find more about carbon dating and things like that. But obviously the Egyptians already had a record of before 8,000 years, when their civilization started. But they also have the record from before. As touching the citizens of 9,000 years ago, I will briefly inform you of their laws and of the nobles of their actions, and the exact particulars of the whole, which will thereafter go through our leisure in the sacred registers themselves. So he's telling him, I'm going to tell you the story, our history, which talking about the priests, Egyptian priests, people from Sais, goes on for 9,000 years. So we have already the register, but there were another civilization that was before us. There was another 9,000 years that we know about, and he says, I'm going to tell you a little about it, and then I'm going to take you to our registers, because the Egyptians were known to be administrators. If you compare these laws with your own, you will find that many of ours are the counterpart of yours as they were in the olden time. So I'm going to stop here now, so you get the timeline right. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. And so now you know that this is veritable truth, because more than one civilization already has been recording this. And of course, this is just a story right now passed down from one generation to another, but the Egyptians have record over in the registers. And in the next video, we're going to talk about where is the location of Atlantis through the history of Plato. See you soon.